In the quiet town of Ravenwood, nothing ever seemed out of place. Yet people kept vanishing without a trace. For decades, residents dismissed each disappearance as bad luck or personal choice. But when a storm exposed a buried box containing belongings of missing locals like Daniel Reeves, Clara Holt, and Miriam, the truth surfaced. All clues led to one man, Ezra Boone, the quiet recluse who lived at the forest's edge. As investigators uncovered a hidden basement filled with evidence, Ravenwood realized it had unknowingly protected a serial killer. Living in plain sight for years, Ravenwood looked like the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. It was small, neat, and surrounded by thick woods that stayed quiet even on windy nights. Families lived in the same houses for generations. Most people worked on apple farms or in the handful of shops along the main road. Outsiders rarely visited, and the locals liked it that way. The town moved at a slow, steady pace that made the days blend together. Because life felt predictable, no one questioned the small things that didn't seem important at the time. The first disappearance happened more than 30 years ago. A middle-aged man who worked at the mill didn't show up for his shift one morning. His car was found in his driveway, his tools still inside the house, and nothing looked out of place. People assumed he left on his own, maybe chasing some opportunity elsewhere. It was easier to believe in a simple explanation than to consider something darker. The police closed the case quickly, and life went on. A few years later, a young woman who taught at the local school vanished after a walk near the woods. Her friends put up flyers and searched the trails, but the forest was so dense that everyone soon felt lost inside it. No footprints, no torn clothing, no signs of a struggle appeared. Her disappearance frightened the town, but when months passed without answers, people pushed the memory aside. Ravenwood had no history of crime, and residents convinced themselves that she must have moved away for personal reasons. It became a quiet rule to avoid asking too many questions. As seasons changed, new families arrived and old ones moved out, creating enough movement to blur the missing faces. When someone failed to return home, there was always a convenient explanation. A relative in another state, a sudden breakup, a job opportunity that required quick travel. The town accepted these ideas because they fit the peaceful image everyone wanted to protect. Admitting anything else would mean admitting that Ravenwood wasn't as safe as they believed. The landscape helped hide the truth as well. The forest stretched for miles, swallowing sound and light once you stepped past the tree line. Animals moved through the brush at night, making noises that could be mistaken for anything. Some paths wound so deep into the woods that even longtime residents avoided them. Whenever someone mentioned feeling uneasy around the forest, others brushed it off as simple imagination. The woods were part of Ravenwood's identity, and no one wanted to see them as a threat. Through the years, small stories circulated. Someone claimed to hear strange noises near the riverbank. Someone else remembered seeing a flashlight deep in the trees when no one should have been out there. These moments faded into local folklore, treated as harmless tales rather than clues. The town stayed calm, the routine stayed the same, and the sense of trust never faded. Ravenwood believed it understood its own boundaries. What no one realized was that the real danger was living inside the town itself, not hiding in the forest people feared. The pattern behind the disappearances started forming long before anyone thought to look for it. Each case seemed isolated, separated by enough time that no one felt the need to compare details. A missing person report would come in, get attention for a few days, then slowly fade as life in Ravenwood returned to normal. The town treated every disappearance like an unfortunate event, rather than a warning. Because nothing dramatic ever happened there, people trusted that nothing ever would. When the mill worker vanished, the case closed without much noise. When the schoolteacher disappeared years later, the same quiet process followed. Police from a small department handled each investigation with limited resources. Officers changed, paperwork shifted between hands, and old records were stored without careful review. There was no system that encouraged anyone to step back and look at the bigger picture. As long as there were no obvious signs of crime, the files were pushed aside and forgotten. It wasn't only the lack of evidence that hid the pattern. It was the timing. Each disappearance took place during late autumn, a period when the forest grew darker and the air carried a heavy stillness. People spent less time outdoors, and the early sunsets made it easy for movements to go unnoticed. Those were the months when travel increased, students left town temporarily, and seasonal workers came and went. The town already expected some level of movement, so missing faces blended into normal changes. The victims themselves shared a subtle link that no one recognized. Many lived alone, or had routines that kept them isolated. They walked the same paths, or lived near the same stretch of woods without realizing their habits placed them in the same invisible circle. Because they didn't know each other well, the town never saw a common thread. To the residents, they were simply unrelated individuals who happened to disappear for personal reasons. As the years passed, the gaps between cases made everything look random. When another person vanished after almost a decade of calm, the old stories resurfaced for a few days. People exchanged cautious glances, wondering if Ravenwood carried a curse or some kind of misfortune. But when the search turned up nothing and the case grew cold, everyone returned to their usual routines. The fear faded once again, replaced by a comfortable belief that the town remained safe. Reports from different eras sat in separate boxes, some incomplete, some missing pages, and others poorly labeled. The lack of organization made it nearly impossible for anyone to recognize that all the disappearances occurred within a small radius. The map remained unmarked, the trails unexamined, and the files untouched. The town never imagined that someone could be behind the pattern. It was easier to assume coincidence than to consider the possibility of a predator living among them. Ravenwood's trust became the perfect cover. Small towns often rely on familiarity, and that familiarity blinded them. The community believed it understood its people, its land, and its history. What remained hidden was the slow, deliberate rhythm guiding each disappearance. The pattern didn't stay invisible by chance. It stayed invisible because no one believed such a pattern could exist in a place like theirs. The storm that hit Ravenwood that winter was stronger than anything the town had seen in years. Wind tore through the trees, heavy snow cracked branches, and old trails disappeared under layers of ice. When the storm finally passed, the forest looked uneven and broken. With fallen trunks blocking paths that had existed for decades, cleanup teams were sent out to clear the damage, working slowly through the tangled mess of branches and mud. No one expected the storm to uncover anything important. It was supposed to be a simple job: remove debris, repair signs, and make the trails safe again. While clearing a section near the base of a hill, a worker's shovel struck something solid beneath the mud. At first he assumed it was an old pipe or a piece of metal scrap left behind by hikers. But when the crew dug around it, they found a rusted metal box wedged deep between roots. The sides were dented, the lid almost fused shut from age. The box didn't belong to the forest, and its placement felt intentional. The workers paused, unsure whether to open it or wait for authorities, but curiosity pushed them to pry it open. Inside, they found objects wrapped in layers of cloth that had darkened with soil. The items were surprisingly well preserved. There was a keychain with a faded name tag, a small bracelet made of wooden beads, and a wallet containing an old ID that matched one of Ravenwood's long-missing residents. That discovery alone would have been enough to alarm anyone. But beneath those items were two more sets of belongings, each connected to different people who had vanished years apart. Nothing inside hinted at weather damage or random loss. Everything pointed to deliberate burial. The workers reported the discovery immediately. Soon the small trail area was crowded with officers, detectives, and curious residents who tried to look past the tape. News spread through Ravenwood faster than the authorities could control. People who had ignored old rumors now found their memories resurfacing. Some recalled strange noises near the woods. Others remembered seeing flashlights deep in the trees when no one should have been out. Stories that were once dismissed as imagination suddenly felt more real. The sheriff's office treated the site like a long-hidden crime scene. Forensic teams sifted through the soil, collected fibers, and photographed every angle of the buried box. The discovery forced them to reopen old files that had been untouched for decades. The missing person cases that once seemed unrelated were now linked by actual evidence. As officers compared timelines and locations, they noticed that all items in the box belonged to victims who disappeared within a small stretch of forest. Their routines and last-seen locations overlapped more than anyone had realized. Ravenwood's calm image began to crack. Residents questioned how something like this could stay hidden for so long. Some blamed the forest, calling it cursed. Others blamed the authorities for not investigating deeper years ago. A quiet panic moved through the town. People locked their doors earlier, avoided the woods completely, and treated strangers with suspicion. The discovery didn't just expose hidden evidence, it exposed the town's long neglect of the truth. The box was only the beginning. It forced everyone to consider the possibility that someone had been operating for years without being noticed. The storm had uncovered more than a metal container. It had torn open Ravenwood's belief that danger always came from outside. For the first time, the town had to confront the idea that the threat had never left the forest or passed through briefly. It had always been there, concealed beneath the ordinary life they trusted. Investigators expanded their search beyond the storm site, moving deeper into old case files and forgotten corners of Ravenwood. They reviewed every missing person report tied to the forest, marking each location on a large map. When the pins clustered around one small area near the outskirts of town, the investigators realized they were looking at more than coincidence. Every victim had lived or spent time close to the same stretch of land. The discovery pushed them to study who lived nearby, who stayed in the area the longest, and who kept to themselves enough to avoid attention. That was when the name Ezra Boone surfaced. He had lived in Ravenwood for almost 40 years, occupying a small cabin hidden behind thick pines. Most residents barely remembered when he arrived. He kept a simple life, working odd jobs, tending a small garden, and avoiding social events. People saw him as a quiet man who preferred solitude, and because he never caused trouble, no one questioned his habits. He blended into the background so well that many forgot he existed unless they passed his property while hiking. When investigators dug into his records, they found something unusual. Ezra had lived in 2 different states before moving to Ravenwood, and in both places he had changed his name. The reasons for the name changes were unclear, because the paperwork was incomplete. But the timing matched periods when unsolved disappearances occurred elsewhere. These details were enough to raise suspicion, and the team decided to survey the cabin. They expected to find an aging man living a quiet, isolated life. Instead, they found a property that carried a strange, unsettling stillness. The cabin looked normal on the outside. The paint was chipped, the windows dusty, and the front porch covered in old tools. Nothing seemed out of place until they noticed the ground behind the cabin. The soil was uneven, as if it had been dug up and refilled multiple times over the years. Nearby was a locked storm cellar, partly covered by fallen leaves and tangled vines. When officers finally forced it open, they discovered stairs leading into a basement that didn't appear on any property records. The basement was cold and dim, lit only by a single hanging bulb. Along the walls were shelves lined with small boxes, each labeled with a year. Some boxes had dates going back more than 3 decades. Inside these boxes were personal items from victims' jewelry. Watches, folded notes, photographs, and other belongings that families once believed were lost forever. The items didn't appear randomly placed. Everything was arranged with unsettling precision, as if someone had organized a private archive. The deeper investigators searched, the more they realized the basement had been used for years without anyone noticing. A workbench covered in old tools sat in one corner, next to a filing cabinet containing newspaper clippings about missing people. The clippings came not only from Ravenwood but also from towns in surrounding states. Many articles were marked with small symbols or underlined dates, showing careful study and planning. The evidence left no room for doubt. Someone had built a secret life beneath that cabin, operating quietly, methodically, and without interruption. Ezra Boone had never drawn attention because he never needed to. He knew the town valued peace and routine, and he used that to his advantage. His secluded home, the dense forest around it, and the town's trust created the perfect shield. Ravenwood finally faced the truth it had ignored for decades. The danger wasn't a stranger passing through or a curse hidden in the woods. It was a man who lived among them, seen, but never noticed, quietly shaping the pattern that had haunted the town for years. Ezra Boone's arrest shocked Ravenwood in a way nothing else ever had. People gathered outside their homes, whispering to neighbors they had known their entire lives. Some stared at the forest as if seeing it for the first time. Others tried to understand how someone could commit so many crimes while living in plain sight. The cabin, once an ignored structure at the edge of town, became the center of every conversation. Officers sealed it off, investigators worked around the clock, and reporters from nearby cities appeared to cover a story the town never thought it would hold. As investigators pieced together the evidence, a chilling picture formed. Ezra had not acted impulsively. He had built his routines carefully, choosing victims who lived alone or kept small circles. He studied their patterns, learning when they walked near the woods or when they were least likely to be missed. He used seasons to his advantage, especially the late autumn months when the forest grew darker and movements were harder to track. He created opportunities that looked natural from the outside, blending disappearances into the normal flow of life in a quiet town. The basement in his cabin held more than boxed evidence. It revealed a timeline of planning, a record of how long he observed certain victims and how he selected the next one. He stored newspapers covering each case, adding his own notes. Some markings highlighted weak points in investigations, showing how he predicted the limits of Ravenwood's small police force. Over the years, he learned exactly how to avoid leaving clues, and he relied on the town's trust to hide his tracks. Every missing person report strengthened his confidence that no one would ever connect him to the crimes. Authorities discovered that Ezra rarely left Ravenwood, but when he did, he traveled during periods when cases in nearby states went cold. Those towns were larger and busier, allowing him to blend in even more easily. Records suggested he changed his identity twice before settling in Ravenwood, each time moving to places with quiet reputations. His decision to stay in the same town for decades showed how secure he felt once he realized no one suspected him. The forest, the cabin, and the town's peaceful rhythm created a perfect environment to remain hidden. When the truth came out, Ravenwood struggled with more than fear. Residents faced the uncomfortable reality that they had ignored signs for years. The pattern of disappearances had been visible only in pieces, scattered across time, but no one had ever stepped back to see the whole picture. The belief that the town was too safe, too ordinary, and too familiar had blinded them. People began questioning how well they knew their neighbors and how easily routine had replaced vigilance. The town took action quickly. Old case files were reviewed with new tools, search procedures were updated, and community meetings were held to rebuild trust. Officers received training to identify patterns that might be overlooked in small towns. Residents created neighborhood groups to check in on each other, determined not to let history repeat itself. Yet even with these changes, quiet tension settled over Ravenwood that never fully disappeared. Ezra Boone's story did more than expose decades of hidden crimes. It changed the way the town saw itself. Ravenwood no longer believed danger always came from outside. People understood that silence could hide more than peace, and that trust, when left unquestioned, could become a shield for someone who knew how to use it. The forest slowly recovered from the storm, but the town carried a scar that would never fade. A reminder that even the quietest places can hold the darkest secrets.